Hello, everybody. This is Eric Enge live from Las Vegas. Last week it was New York. Where will I be next week? Who knows? I probably don't know at this point. So that's the life of a road warrior, I guess. But I'm out here at PubCon together with Mark Traphagen, who is not with us at the moment, but he will be joining us shortly. And thrilled as always because it's First Tuesday, and that means we get David Amerland on the show with us. David, how are you?
I'm good. I'm actually thrilled to be here and envious because I can't be at PubCon.
Yes, indeed. It's a great show. It's really one of my favorite shows of the year. They do a great job. Brett Tabke and his team, they put together a really good show. Lots of great speakers, lots of great attendees, lots of great networking. Got to see so far Wade Harmon, Dustin Stout, Andrew Haresowicz. They're all here and hanging out. So that's really cool too. But hey, I think we're supposed to talk about scaling semantic search, but I'm going to derail the agenda temporarily.
Okay.
In a wanton act of disobedience, or whatever the right phrase
Vandalism.
We have to talk for just a few minutes about the Dave Besbris interview. Did you see that?
I did, absolutely. I read it and I thought it was absolutely fantastic, and it really feeds into a lot of the things which we would cover anyway. I think it's brilliant.
Yeah, so for those of you who are watching and don't know about the Dave Besbris interview, the bottom line is that the head of the Google Plus team came out and used a technical term, something like poppycock, when talking about the demise or proposed demise or whatever of Google Plus. Very strong statements made about where the social media enterprise of Google is going, their ongoing investment in it, the resources that they're putting in place, the fact that they're actually expanding the team. Fascinating stuff. So not the main topic for today, but because it's breaking news, I just felt like we had to acknowledge it, David. And you know, for those of us who are invested in Google Plus, take a little moment and celebrate. So I'm going to have a good stiff drink. Well, okay, it's a water.
Good old H2O, right?
And you don't have to be embarrassed about the pillow behind you. So how about that?
Perfect, thank you.
So having said that, the topic for today is scaling semantic search. So we need to remember to bring the scaling aspect into it as we talk about this. But I feel very privileged to have been able to publish a study today that we had members of the Stone Temple team working on. So a quick shout out to Caitlin O'Connell and Justin Markison for their great work on the study. Thank you so much, guys. And what we did is we took 3,000 queries that we thought would be likely to generate what I'll call knowledge panels or knowledge boxes, which by our definition included straightforward knowledge panels, like if you ask a question like compare apples versus oranges, to step-by-step instructions like how to reset an iPhone, or structured snippets that you can see only on a few queries today, they're fairly rare still, to the carousel up top, to the knowledge thing over on the right that you get sometimes. So all those were included. And we did a comparison between Google Now, Siri, and Cortana, and all of those were done using voice commands, right? Speaking into a phone. We did it that way because actually on Google and Bing, the behavior when you type something in using text in the search engine at Google or Bing, the behavior is different than it is when you do it by voice search. Interestingly enough, Google will show more knowledge boxes when you type it in, and Bing will show, Google will show fewer knowledge boxes when you type it in. They'll show more when you speak it. And Bing is the opposite. they'll show more when you type and fewer when you speak. I don't know why, but I'm just the reporter here. So, so that's a little bit of data from our study.
There's a good reason for that.
Sorry?
There's a good reason why that happens, which hopefully we'll be able to address a little bit here.
Yeah, so just to tell people briefly about it, though, the summary is that for all the queries we tried, 58% of the time, Google now delivered some sort of knowledge type result. 29% of the time, Siri did, and 20% of the time, Cortana did. So Google's decaying, and we talked about this before we started. And David, you gave some really great insight as to why it is Google has such a lead. So why don't you let
the first of all, I've just actually got through the search just before we started, and I think it's fascinating, and I'm going to be talking about it a little bit afterwards. It is really valuable. I would advise everybody to look at it. And really, it's a comparison of two things. It's a comparison of technologies, and when we talk about semantic technologies, we're talking about the grasp and ideas behind it conceptually, and then the quality of the programming. And it's worth remembering here that a lot of the initial research on semantic search and semantic technologies and the semantic web as we know it now came out of Microsoft Research Laboratories and Yahoo. It didn't come out of Google until a lot later. And they took a lot of those ideas and worked on them, basically. So they used them as a springboard, which shows that perhaps, arguably, the initial quality of semantic search when it started being implemented on Bing versus Google would probably, we could say, had a slight edge when it came to Bing. Certainly when it came to within the US sort of vertical. It's not reflected in the results, you're quite right, and there are good reasons for that. And there's two elements to any kind of semantic technology. The first one is the quality of the programming you implement, which obviously you're going to constantly improve upon. And the second thing is the data which you actually use to train it and then pull all the bits together inside it. And if we think of the semantic programming as the engine, then the data is the fuel. And they're both critical to the final result, pretty much like running a car. So Google has always had access to more data. I mean, you mentioned the disparity in quality in voice search, and it's worth noting that before Google released voice search, they used something like 232 billion queries to actually train it on. That's before it was even released. And obviously, the moment it was released, it constantly kept getting upgraded and improved, which is why we see the results we see now. Now, that's a staggering difference in quality. It's like, to quantify it in terms of people, it's like having a world-class boxer and the whole machinery behind him, and a talented amateur who is just him. So, you know, the boxer has an entire team. He's got nutritionists, trainers, top quality equipment. The amateur has willpower, perhaps, and he's hungry, and he's got skill and talent, but he hasn't got a support mechanism behind him. He's definitely the underdog. And that's exactly what we're seeing here in terms of the results which we see. And that is something which perhaps is not capable of being changed as we move forward.
So, yeah, I just want to recap that because I think it's really important. As you said, just even from the point of view of voice processing, Google had, you said 230 some odd billion data queries that they were able to leverage just to even roll out their voice recognition capability. But on top of that, just their access to data to feed things like what is the source of the best answer to a given question, what's authoritative, what can we really count on, and what confidence level can we place in the potential for a given result to be accurate is much higher. So just to simplify it for the audience, what it really comes down to is having far more information with which to feed their algorithms. And to use your boxer's example, it's the equivalent of saying that you know, the boxer wouldn't have have access to a sufficient amount of food as they were training, right? I mean, it's just there's no way you can compete even if you have the same amount of skill as in programming, right?
Yep. And in that analogy, experience comes in as well. I mean, Google now is so far ahead. They're constantly learning from mistakes and fixing them, whereas arguably, all the other contenders are just coming up to them. A case in point, Siri, and I think, you mentioned a voice search you put a voice search on the stream when you ask Siri, why are fire trucks red? And the answer was nonsensical, really, although quite entertaining. And I think it's that kind of quality that elevates voice search from the amusement stroke novelty area to something you can really rely on and use constantly. And obviously the moment you use it constantly, it learns all the time and gets better. Whereas if you use this novelty stroke entertainment, you are consciously limiting the data points you actually give it, so you can't really improve that much.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. And by the way, if you're not familiar with Siri's answer to why are fire trucks red, you can check out my stream. I posted it yesterday, and it's fascinating. And by the way, it's going through these queries is wonderfully amusing. I mean, our team, I mentioned them earlier, Caitlin and Justin did the heavy lifting here, but just going through all that stuff and seeing some of the things they found, it's like, oh my gosh, it was hilarious and very entertaining. But having said that, okay, so Google has this big lead, and it seems like it's going to be very difficult for the engines to catch up, the other engines, Siri and Bing, simply because even if they start to get richer data sources, this is stuff that takes time. And I want to highlight another aspect of this, which I really spent quite some time studying over the past few weeks. And when you talk about trying to build semantic search or something like the knowledge graph, you're really talking about machine intelligence or artificial intelligence capabilities. When you dig into the kinds of things that go into building these kinds of algorithms, you're essentially trying to bring the same kind of intelligence to processing information that humans can, and trying to approximate that. You really are bringing so many different things in there: linguistic analysis, neuropsychology, computer science. Many different elements are involved. So I'd love to get your take on this, David. But to me, when I look at this, it's while great strides are being made, the strides that we're really seeing today are kind of like point solutions to specific problems. In other words, they figure out how to solve one kind of problem, and then it rolls out. And I'm going to give an example in a minute, but I want to get your reaction to this line of thinking before I do that, David. And then the whole notion that they're ready to build something which is more intelligent than a human in processing certain kinds of information, I think we're a long way from that just yet.
Well, let's tackle this backwards, and you're quite right. I mean, there are two types of artificial intelligence. There's weak artificial intelligence, which essentially use a number of parallel processes to simultaneously work out specific things and simulate human thinking. And then you have strong artificial intelligence. And strong artificial intelligence takes data, analyzes, and comes up with inferences the way we do. So it makes judgment calls. We're a long way from getting to the strong artificial intelligence, which, it's a Terminator-style kind of thinking. If we look at weak artificial intelligence, we're almost there. We see basically that it's a large problem around it is the amount of available computing power, and Google is extremely good not just at building computing power, but actually making computers work harder. And they've always been very good at that. Even since the early days of search, they managed to build their own servers. They used to put, in those days, data centers were in containers. Every container that Google had contained 1,500 more servers than every container that Microsoft had, because they could pack them more closely together. So using a simple cost-benefit analysis, Google was able to get more computing power per container, which made it more efficient and economic than Microsoft. So Microsoft was outclassed in search, and also Yahoo at the time, simply on computing power, which is what gave Google the edge back then. And they continue to have that kind of edge in terms of computing by allowing their processors to do things differently. So they work smarter, not just harder. But to come back to your original statement, you're quite right. I mean, we would like them ideally to say, hey guys, we've got semantic search, we're flipping the switch, and tomorrow everything will work beautifully well. Just ask your phone and you'll get perfect answers, for instance. But it doesn't work that way. And the reason it doesn't work that way is because we are seeing the building of a strong, possibly a strong AI in the process. We're witnessing all the little cognitive analysis centers being put together bit by bit. So the process is incremental, and we're constantly learning from that. You know, we saw that when voice search first came along, it was fairly weak, despite the fact that it had been trained on so many billions of queries beforehand, and it got better and better and better. We can see that we have seen the same process with Google now, which started out as an interesting novelty, and now it's becoming almost an indispensable personal assistant, being able to do a lot of things for you. Google Desktop is constantly developing in terms of the quality and the type of answers it gives us. And the reason we're seeing this constant evolution behind all these things is that more and more, so we call it subsets of data, incrementally are becoming linked up. Dwayne Forrester, because we're monopolizing things with Google, Dwayne Forrester, who's the product manager over at Microsoft on search, he said that search engines do what any other product does anywhere. They go where the people are. So they start out with popular queries. They start out with football teams and soap operas, because that's what we ask of them. So we see a lot of improvements there, and the lessons learned there are applied elsewhere. As the data gets connected, we create subsets. We'll have very good performance in one area, but perhaps not such a good performance in another area. But then we're beginning incrementally to link these things up. And certainly the environment where all this functions is critical. I mean, Google started out with Google+. It gave it a huge leap because it was able to do two things, very specific things. First of all, it was able to link real identities through its real name policy in the beginning. It was able to do that, which gave it a certain amount of confidence in the ability to mine relationships and mine the quality of those relationships through their interaction and engagement. That became a learning process because inevitably, we don't really need real names to perform well. I can call myself Mickey Mouse, and you can be, anybody else, and we can still connect at a meaningful level, provided that I think the relationship has value and you think the same thing. So really, in order for Google to ascertain that quality of that anonymous relationship, there had to be a baseline of perhaps real name relationships and everything that goes with them. And they achieved that through Google+. And one of the reasons that the authorship was pulled is because obviously the uptake was a little bit poor, but also it's not as necessary anymore. And the other thing, of course, coming back to cost-benefit analysis, the computing power released from that went somewhere else because it can do other things very quickly. So all these things, all these actions make sense in terms of achieving these things. And we are going to see constant evolution on this front because it's being built as we look at it. I mean, every time we look at search, our very own activities change it. It's almost like Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. The fact that we're looking at it changes what we're looking at. And the more we delve into it, the more it changes. So we're in that kind of area.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. And I'm going to see if this works. I don't know if it will. So bear with me, audience. I'm going to try and see whether or not you can hear the response from the phone, because I'm going to try a series of queries just to demonstrate something.
Okay.
Where is the Empire State Building?
Empire State Building is at 355th Avenue, New York.
Pictures.
Check out these pictures for Empire State Building.
Awesome.
Who built it?
The Empire State Building was designed by William F. Lamb.
Restaurants.
Here are the listings for restaurants near Empire State Building.
Give me directions to the third one.
Here's a map of 235th Avenue, New York.
And by the way, that map is the third one listed in the list of restaurants it gave me. So that's a sequence, and it's fascinating for a couple of reasons. Well, it's more than a couple of reasons. First of all, to me, it's an example of a point solution that I talked about before, where they were able to solve a specific, well, several specific problems. I mentioned the Empire State Building once in the entire sequence, only in the first query, right? And then second of all, when you got to the end there, you notice how I said, give me directions to the third one. That's pretty sophisticated linguistic analysis and understanding of context right there.
It is, and it also links back to the previous conversation to create that kind of context around the end user, which is you in this case. So you're quite right. This is a kind of sort of data cloud processing that happens on the fly, which takes a lot of data. It takes a lot of nuance in terms of how we process data, how things are processed through profiles, through anticipating perhaps the kind of queries you're going to ask. There's a lot of things which are happening as we speak on search itself, and they give those results. And that is an incredible achievement from a technological point of view. But from an end user point of view, we can see now the functionality, how easy it is and how good it is. And if you're getting that kind of response and result and usefulness out of it, you're only more likely to use it further, which helps it improve because it gets that data. And having said that, Google now, which is also an associated product, now also knows what you've done, and it's working hard to give you recommendations in the area which fit in with this. So it creates an additional layer around this.
Yes, well, among other things, they know that I've repeated that sequence probably about 20 times by now. So, but I know very interesting.
They probably think you're obsessive.
Yeah. But it's very interesting because you see, I mean, to me, that's an example. They solved some very specific problems that allowed a very deep and complex sequence of things to happen. But to me, it seems very attached to the notion of entities, right, and understanding of entities and relationships that relate to those entities, So there were several aspects of that there could be a builder. I could have thrown in the height. I didn't. It certainly understood that there would be pictures of it and understood that there'd be restaurants nearby. All these things, that's a very complex set of relationships that it is actually gotten to understand.
It is, and I'm very glad you mentioned entities, really, because we don't really talk a lot about these, but they're key now to the semantic web. An entity essentially is it's essentially an identity which is quantified through a number of attributes which are highly verifiable, independently verifiable. And this is exactly how things are scaling, because in the beginning of semantic search, Google Plus was very central to it because there's a springboard that was used for the first verifiable set of data, which then was linked to other sources like Freebase and Wikipedia to actually produce that kind of thing. But Google is already ahead of the game by decoupling itself from its dependency on Google Plus, which doesn't mean that the Google Plus is being deprecated. No, it's not. But certainly Google is broadening its net now. It's going outside it. It's beginning to look at things independently. It's we look at the knowledge vault, which essentially is a massive knowledge library being created. And very recently, I looked at one of the research papers on how Google can find and verify identities in the social web outside Google Plus, even if those identities actually use a different name or a different login, and try to reconcile them so that it knows that the person who spoke about something on Twitter, for instance, is also the same person who spoke about something peripheral or tangential, or even the same thing on Google+, and then the same person who was perhaps associated with a Facebook post that Google was able to index. Now, and this is critical. I mean, it sounds a little bit like Big Brother and surveillance society, and it's not. It's simply, we talked in the past about data density, And we need to explain that, because it sounds like a very sort of technical term, and it's not. In the real world, everything which we do is a signal to something, it means something, and it has some kind of intent. From the way we dress to the way we speak, and we talk about tonality now, signaling intent, the language we employ, how we arrange to meet people. Do we meet them at the pub or do we meet them at the office? All these are signals, and there's a lot of data richness in our everyday world, which actually means something, and it goes back to our identity and reputation and trust and who we are and what we do. We get on the web, and things used to be very fragmented and very loose. We used to do one thing on Twitter and something else on Facebook and something else on LinkedIn, and we were almost different personalities on each one. And now all this is being pulled together. And ultimately what Google or any kind of search engine in this kind of environment would like to do is actually link up the offline and online identities. Again, not for any kind of surveillance really, but for that kind of data richness. Because the moment you can actually link everything up, then suddenly you have a very clear picture of the online-offline world, which can incredibly increase the kind of services you can offer, and also the kind of advantage you can take of that data in order perhaps to use advertising or to sell other services or to develop new products.
Yeah, totally. And by the way, I'm going to get there's a question from William Rock here about how this demo plays into the knowledge graph. This understanding of entities or things versus strings is integral to the knowledge graph, right? So the knowledge graph at this point is not simply about extracting data from fixed databases. Right, so the thing, it was actually Amit Singhal back in 2012 made that clear. He specifically said that the knowledge graph is not just pulling information from Freebase, Wikipedia, or the CIA Factbook, which were three of the structured databases they started with, but it's a process for finding and learning new things and being able to leverage that information. So William, the ability to know that that the builder of the Empire State Building is, or the original architect is William F. Lamb, that's knowledge, and that actually may well have come out of a structured database. But the part about the restaurants is a step beyond that, right? It's not coming so simply from a structured database. I mean, they're building a structured database from information they extract automatically from the web.
Yep, exactly. And since we're talking about structured databases in general, it is worth noting the environment that the three giants in this field, or should I say perhaps four, are operating in. And the giants are obviously Google, then Microsoft with Siri, Apple with Microsoft with Cortana, Apple with Siri, and we have Facebook in itself, which is also experimenting with search. And although their initial efforts are very poor, they do sit on a motherlode of data, and they have within their walled garden the ability to map those relationships quite at a very granular level. So if they ever solve the internal problem of search on Facebook, and they're trying very hard, they will have a very strong semantic product at their hand, which perhaps will actually finally release the entire point of having Facebook as a value proposition on a global scale. Because at the moment it only works very locally, although it's very huge. These are the four giants.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, no, it's interesting that you mentioned Facebook, because you're right, they do sit on a mountain of data. And, to kind of tie that into the core theme of what we're talking about today, because they have a mountain of data, they do have the potential to build something of some scale, but that data has a certain structural bias to it.
Yes.
So
let's quantify that. Yeah. To give you an example,
very specific problems, and they will be able to do things that other people can't do.
Yes. And Facebook faces a different problem altogether. Most the three large verticals here, Google and Apple and Microsoft, they have really good engines, and the struggle they're facing within inverted commas is to feed them quality fuel. And Facebook sits on a motherlode of fuel, albeit it's dirty fuel at the moment, and they're trying to build a quality engine to take advantage of that. So this is these are the two sort of two different approaches to the problem, but they're all trying to get to the same point for the same reason. They want to essentially take all the data which we sit on in this world and allow it to mean something at the point of use of the end user. Hey Mark. Mark is coming
we have
in.
an intruder.
No, we want you.
Very shortly. I should have said I sense a disturbance in the force.
Yes, that would have been very disturbing.
It's not quite with us yet, but Mark Traphagen is on the verge of joining us. So he did just do a live interview over at PubCon, which you can see the replay on Search Engine Journal, and so that should be available shortly. So, Mark, when you are able to be vocal in this, we'll look forward to that. Yeah, so we do have a question from Marilyn Moore that I want to take. And can you elaborate on the current role that Google Plus plays as far as Google is concerned? Since Mark is just jumping in, I won't throw him into the maelstrom just yet.
Oh, come on! No, do it.
Okay.
The answer is yes. Whatever. I don't know what the question is, but.
And I'll say Mark is right.
David, your line is Mark. That's a brilliant answer.
Thank you. It's almost like we rehearsed it, right?
David, when you patented the phrase "Mark is right," it meant no one else could use it. So I think you didn't do him a favor with that.
I grant full rights to anyone that ever wants to say that. A special bonus if my wife ever says it.
Okay, Mark is right.
Okay, but
there you go.
To get back to, I was going to say, to get back to Marilyn's question there. I think the latest. I mean, Google Plus continues to play a very important role. It hasn't been deprecated by any sense or any means of the word. And the interview released by Dave. I forgot his last name. Thank you. Who was the the product manager of Google Plus? Essentially says that the social web and social activities is social computing in itself is an entire field which is still developing. And Google has a strong interest in that, and Google Plus continues to play a terrifically important role in that respect. And it's a very long-term kind of strategy. So we shouldn't expect anything sort of very concrete and very direct to happen immediately in Google Plus, but it is there, and it's constantly being developed, and it's constantly developing. And we're going to see, we've got a lot of things coming. We have social polls coming on the platform, which is something Google acquired Pollard not too long ago, and they're bringing it in. There's a lot of other tests happening in terms of community and how that is being used, and these are all at the starting point, despite the fact that Google Plus is now not a young network by any sense of the word. It certainly hasn't matured. We're still taking baby steps in terms of how all this is developing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I'm gonna give an answer from a slightly different direction, but tie it back to what we were talking about. So if we have 300 some odd million active users on Google Plus, that's effectively 300 some odd million entities, which Google is now able to collect data on, and that whole concept of everything we talked about is, this ties into that. And I mean, you look that Google has made a lot of investments in personalized search based on Google Plus, so it's definitely a priority for Google, in terms of the network to keep leveraging that. That's a huge chunk of data. Do they wish they could have as much data as Facebook has in that realm? Sure. That's not going to happen. So given that that's not going to happen, they're going to take what they have been able to build, which is, by the way, quite significant. But Mark, David and I talked briefly about the Dave Besbris interview earlier today, and we can use Marilyn's question as a way to let you just weigh in on that for a bit, and then we'll continue from there.
Yeah, if we had paid Dave Besbris, we couldn't have had a better timing and moment of this interview that went up. I don't know if anyone's linked it yet. I've got a link.
He gets paid, doesn't he? By Google.
Yeah, he does get paid, yes. But wonderful for us here in this discussion in terms of this interview. So I'll put a link to that when I'm done talking in the chat. But yeah, the interview pretty much nailed as far as quelling a lot of the bullet points of the rumors that have been out since Vic and Datra left about Google+. First of all, just saying that it's here. It's a long-term project, which we've all been saying. I think he does, without saying it as directly as you just did, David, so brilliantly, that he does say that it is different because it's integrated into Google. He makes that point at one point in the interview that it's not just a bolt-on, it's not an add-on thing. And I love that he made the point that it wasn't built to compete. Google, if you are just reading the book How Google Works by Eric Schmidt, which is about the management side of Google, really some tremendous insights into there, and that their whole mindset is they don't compete. They don't do things like, oh my, Microsoft is doing this. Oh no, Apple's doing this. Now I'm sure to some extent that enters into the conversations, and they do have to keep an eye on that. He's realistic about it. But their goal is to do things because it's googly to do it. It's on the trajectory. It makes sense for what they want to do in the world. It makes sense for their users. And so Google Plus really was built with that in mind. It wasn't built to compete with Facebook, although as I always say, I don't think they would have minded if it had done damage to Facebook. That they wouldn't have shed tears over that. But it does something much more important for Google, and we've emphasized this. It identifies the entities. It gets them tied in. It's gotten hundreds of millions of people to have Google accounts who never had them before, and every evidence we have is that a great number of those are using those accounts on a daily basis, which means they're searching the web, they're using the web, logged into Google, and this gives Google a lot more clear picture of who they are, what they do, what they're interested in so many ways. So it's all that to say, I think the Besbris interview emphasizes what we've been saying. Google Plus is incredibly valuable to Google, and that's why it's not going anywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, and to tie it into the sort of the theme of what we're talking about here, just as we've said, this really is a source of data, and as you said very early on in the show, David, Google has more data than anybody, and we can recount the ways they collect it, right? They have the world's most popular phone OS platform. They have the world's most popular analytics package. They have the world's most popular browser. They have the world's most popular search engines. Have I left anything out? Oh, and for all those people out there who feel that Google is, struggling with social media, we can certainly talk about Google Plus and its 300+ million active users, but we can't forget YouTube.
That's right. It's like the second largest search engine in the world, absolutely.
Right, which is itself a social platform. So they have so much data coming in from so many sources that it's unbelievable. And they've shown other willingnesses to have things out there that are a bit more, maybe they're not dominant. So I'm just going to give you an example. They have a URL shortener, GOO.GL. Okay, it is certainly not the dominant URL shortener out there, but it's still a valuable source of data, right? They can learn things from that.
The Chrome browser, which is the dominant browser on the web.
Yeah. So it's amazing. So we do have a question though from Baruch Lunsky. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. Where do you see Google in 2015?
Oh, wow.
I think still in Mountain View. I'll risk that prediction.
Well, it's amazing, right? But essentially, we've already seen part of the direction where everything is going. It's becoming very personalized in terms of the services we consume. And when semantic search first came in the picture, we said that the first page of Google is going because that used to be the image we had of search, and it used to be the same for everybody. And I said that's mutating. Now think about almost every personalized orientated service that Google has is beginning to mutate towards the use that we make of it. And that's the direction it's going, which means that the relationship which is being created between Google, I'm using Google as an example here, but the same thing is happening now at Bing and at Apple. The relationship that is being created between the end user and the company is one which is synergistic. There's a certain symmetry to the relationship in that they're trying very hard to create services which are useful to us, and they expect in return certain access, willing access to the data which we're willing to give them. And that's basically the winning edge that the company that does this best will get the most data and will be far and away the winner of this kind of semantic technology race. So that's where we're heading towards now.
And so what kind of advances might you expect in terms of semantic search over the next year? I mean, I know I'm asking you to speculate in ways that are very difficult.
Well, yeah, they are, because we're not quite sure what will get linked up next. I mean, we know that polls are coming in, for instance, within Google+. And the polls that Polar has are very social in nature, which release an entirely different set or subset of relationships and data, which will then feed into the way that search and other services mutate. But one prediction I can make with a relatively high degree of accuracy is that we're going to see more and more predictive services coming in from Google now. And Google now is going to play a lot more of a central role to this, because it's, let's think of this as a tip of the iceberg. A lot of the stuff which is happening beneath the surface becomes visible at the point of Google now, which makes full use of both the data set that Google has access to, its semantic technology, and what it knows about us, to become very predictive and a very useful assistant. And we're going to see more and more of that.
Yeah, so I think that's true. I think another thing that we can suggest will happen is that there'll be an expansion of the mapping between entities and relationships, and they'll be able to do more. So, I mean, I gave a very specific demo, as you saw, around the Empire State Building, which was fun and seemed quite sophisticated, and was quite sophisticated. But there's many other things you might try like that wouldn't work. So I could, the Empire State Building is one particular building. That probably would not work for the MGM Grand Hotel here in Las Vegas, right?
Yes.
By the way, we're not staying at the MGM Grand. In case you're all curious, it's just I'm looking out my window and I can see it. So I brought that example up, but so that layer doesn't go very deep right now, and I think they'll be able to do much, much more about that. And with that.
Exactly, and I think within that, I mean, it's worth pointing out because we're talking about how the semantic web is scaling, and essentially it's a case of environment. And to explain this, I think that everything that Google does right now is not as so much as in creating a product, but in creating a service, and that includes Google now, Google Plus. But if you think of search as a service rather than a product, essentially it tries to become as useful as possible. Apple is trying to do the same thing with their products, and Microsoft, for the first time ever, is trying to do the same, to apply the same philosophy and approach. And all of this is based on the ability to actually have an environment where people can actually function in order to receive that kind of service. Google has it through Google Search, through its many web properties like Gmail and Google Plus and YouTube, and it certainly has a very strong platform in the Android environment, which is also integrated into all those services because they're all interlinked. Apple has iOS, and we can see from Eric's study how limiting that is, because the technology behind it might be fantastic. We don't really know, but certainly as a company, they wouldn't take shortcuts in that front. But having a limited supply of data to actually run it on, the service feels very poor and untrustworthy, and certainly more of a novelty rather than a useful tool. And Microsoft, they are beginning to now use get used to the idea of creating an environment out of the Windows operating system, which in the past was a product. But if you create an environment, then they get data, which, funnily enough, brings into play something which in Microsoft sites had never been a very viable product, which is search. You know, they used to have Bing, and before that they used to have Microsoft Search, and it used to cost them $2.5 billion a year to run, so it was at a loss. You know, if they sold it, they would have been $2.5 billion a year richer. They didn't sell it, lucky for them. And now it's actually beginning to tie together all the different services. They're talking about integrating into Xbox, which is a huge gaming environment. They're talking about bringing it into their cloud service. So the philosophy is there, and we're beginning, all of us, to see that essentially you have to be in an environment in order to access the products. You have to choose which environment you're going to be in. Knowingly now, you know that you're going to have to give up some data, and really the decision comes to what kind of products really meet your needs.
Yes, indeed. So it's fascinating to think about how this expansion is going to continue, and unfortunately there isn't a major crystal ball, but it's the data that is going to drive that expansion, right? So the reason why my demo worked with the Empire State Building but won't work with the MGM Grand Hotel, it's mathematics, basically. And the mathematics is they don't yet have enough confidence about doing it with the MGM Grand Hotel. So from and I don't know this is exactly how it's implemented, but excuse me, you could imagine that it's really simple, that somewhere there's an algorithm calculating all this stuff, and when the confidence level gets high enough, it gets sort of switched on, and it just starts doing it.
Mm-hmm. As I say, here's an area, David, where I'd like to propose to you and see what you think about it. That I think, as we talk about this, what Eric is just talking about now, this building confidence levels and getting, we're seeing now we get good answers usually for things that are pretty prominent in the world, like the Empire State Building, actors and things like that are well known. Moving down to the next level, to be really useful, Google is going to have to get down into a deeper level of people, places, and things that aren't as well known, but be able to establish confidence about that. Here's a thought that I had just recently, just walking around Las Vegas here, looking at how Foursquare is being developed now. They moved off their check-in into Swarm. Foursquare now is concentrating on being a recommendation engine. They're doing a very interesting thing, and that is the more reviews that you do on Foursquare, tips they call them, the more tips you leave about places, you begin to earn credit as being, a recommended. You get a badge, you get like that, in airports or restaurants or casinos or something like that. But what's being factored in is not only how many tips you leave, but other people liking your tips and saying that this guy is, this gal is credible. I would love to see Google in the area of reviews, because we all know that reviews can be gamed, they can be very janky, they're hard to trust, but all the review sites, including Google, want to be able to use that data from real people, real people's responses to different businesses, different things out there in the world. So wouldn't it be interesting if Google began to, in some way, be able to rate that confidence thing? It's kind of like the Airbnb model, where it's not just that people rank or rate the places that they can stay at, but the places that they stay at rank them as users and responses. Yeah. By the way, just learned in New York City last week, I didn't know this, our Uber driver told us that the drivers give a rating, a 5-star rating, to their passengers after the ride. Yes. So you as a passenger get a rating.
Well, exactly. And I was going to say, that's a brilliant example. I'm so glad you brought it up, because essentially we're talking about in a very semantic search, the ability to grade relationships and their interactions. Using the jargon, we're talking about nodes and edges, where the node is the person and the edges is the relationship. And we've seen something very similar with TripAdvisor, where if you put in a review, not only the number of reviews you put in are actually beginning to gain you some kind of reputational level, but also how useful they are from independent viewers who see them and like them or not, and that sort of begins to validate them. And essentially, at some point, Google will do the same thing. The challenge here is to create the entities that Eric spoke about. The moment it has high enough confidence in the identity of an entity, and it could be a pseudonym, it really doesn't matter, as long as Google has confidence in who you are in terms of what you do, then it will be able to ascertain the truthfulness or the trust it has in you, and the truthfulness that tell your activities and ascribe a score, which then will allow others to interact with you and they can ascribe a score to that. So again, it's a matter of creating the environment, and that impetus that Google has in terms of bringing the online and the offline world together, indexing the world's information, and that's not just the digital worlds, it's all the world's information, has very much to do with that scaling that semantic search is all about. We have Google Plus, which will come about. We have a project in Google X on 3D mobile phones, which will be able to map the world around you in 3D, and that is an extra layer of data which will be coming in the future as we progress. And since we're sort of talking about the future of search, from Eric's point of view, he mentioned MGM. At some point in the future, he'll be able to say, what's that hotel out my window? And Google search will be able to determine, first of all, where he is in the world, secondly, perhaps his orientation in terms of where he's looking at, and then from that building, that window, what is the hotel opposite, and say, that's the MGM casino or the MGM hotel, and it was built by somebody so long ago, and it's the 156th biggest hotel in the world, perhaps, or something like that. But that's the world we're actually going towards, and it's very much a function of computational power, which we spoke of in the beginning, and the amount of data that's available to run through it.
So I have another demonstration I want to do for you. Basically, what I'm going to demonstrate to you is it also has something to do with what data sources Google has confidence in, all right? And I'm going to show a data source they have confidence in. It also has to do with their ability to understand what I'm saying, and because it has to be able to understand a given names. And so here we go. Who is Mark Traphagen?
According to Search Engine Land, Mark Traphagen is Senior Director of Online Marketing for Stone Temple Consulting. His primary responsibility is building the online reputation of Stone Temple while testing strategies and tactics that will benefit STC clients. He has a special reputation as an expert on Google Plus and Google authorship.
So that was my gift to you for today, Mark.
Wow.
That's awesome. Absolutely awesome.
All right, I need to change my identity. They found out about me. They know me.
Although they pronounce it Traphagen.
Time to change again.
And that was a Siri search or a Google Now search?
No, that was Google Now. The demo I did earlier, by the way.
Siri, get real.
The demo I did earlier was also Google Now, so both demos were Google Now. So this is an example of them getting making use of more different data sources. This is from Search Engine Land. They've decided now that they have a confidence level in that data source, and they were able to recognize, although they pronounced it Traphagen rather than Traphagen, they nonetheless put it together and figured out that that was what I was asking about, and then it read the description from the Search Engine Land site. But and there's many reasons, other than it being my gift to Mark for this show, to let him know that he's somebody now, according to Google Now. But these things all have to come together before anything can happen. And when we talk about scaling the semantic web, it's about increasing the confidence level in these things, and more data, as we keep saying in the show. And just to relate to a question from William Rock as to how does Google use semantic search? How do they connect the dots? Well, I mean, oh shoot, I just closed that out the way I didn't want to do that. It's going to be hard for me to get rid of that now. But the point is, oh, there we go. They use this information, and it's all math. They get to a point where they have a high enough confidence level, and they're able to recognize the query and the intent, and then map it all together.
Can we take just two very quick questions which are related from the stream? One is from Twain. He said, did any of us read that in 2009 YouTube discovered 5-star ratings are useless? Twain, yes, and there are reasons for that. Not least because in 2009 there was not the kind of interlinking that goes on now, so it was easy to game that kind of rating system. So yes, it was useless, which is why Google largely abandoned it. And this is again why they haven't yet started taking reviews into consideration in that kind of the same way that perhaps we see in Airbnb, because they haven't got that interlinking and high-level confidence in place just yet. So this is coming. And the other one is by Hart GA. He says, do we really want Google to provide our character reference? Let me quantify this for a second, because that's an important question and a very important concern. As we speak, and as semantic search and semantic technologies are scaling across the web, the finance industry is beginning to put into place certain products which will use our social score by mining our social identities across the semantic web to determine whether we should get a loan or not. And the basis of that is that our connections and our relationships and the values we put into that and how we build them up are a better predictive sort of score of our future behavior and trustworthiness than whatever they've been using up to now. So this is happening, and Google isn't really going to give us a character reference. All that Google does and all that these programs do is essentially mine the connections and the behavior we implement. So we are responsible for that, the people we interact with are responsible for that, and the connections we have and the quality of those connections are responsible for that. So it's not Google arbitrarily assigning a score to this, it's not even a finance company assigning a score to this, it's we who are responsible for that. And that's something which we need to sort of take on board, because we're now becoming accountable for our behavior in a degree to which we haven't been used to before in the past. And this is a direct effect of the transparency which we are experiencing across the web. This is brand new territory. It will need new literacies on our part, perhaps new ethics even, as we begin to move across the 21st century and we encounter problems which we haven't encountered before. Case in point, the leaked nude photographs of celebrities and how we reacted to them. We do need to find new ways of actually working together as a global community, and these are challenges to be solved.
Yeah, and I actually could also address another comment from Twain, talking about you know, the relationships between semantic markups and natural language and natural human intelligence. It's actually a very critical comment. But just for the record, nobody's saying that natural language processing, you know, in terms of like demoing it through this phone, is specifically the driver of all that. But an understanding of natural language is very much at the heart of being able to deal with semantic challenges. And the reason for demoing it this way, other than the fact that it's cute, is that Google has wired much more of the knowledge graph into being activated by voice search than they have by text search. So we can demonstrate more that way. But you know, understanding that, and we're talking about semantic search and the knowledge graph. To me, those are all in the same space. I think they're all highly related. So that's my take on that.
Brilliant. Yep.
Okay, well, we're kind of at the end of the show. I feel a little bit gypped because we only get marked for about half of it. We should offer some closing comments. David.
Yes. Moving forward in the semantic web, we're going to see a lot of changes. We're going to see a lot of new products and a lot of new outcomes of all this interconnectivity. And the constant to date in all this has been a very strong emotional response from us. Sometimes we hate it, sometimes we love it, and either way we tend to blindly respond and react. And this is entirely wrong. If we're ever to get into a meaningful place between us and technology. We really need to take a step back and stop reacting emotionally and actually understand what's happening and then devise a strategy to deal with it. We all have a choice, and we just need a cool head and the willingness to exercise it.
And Mark?
Just going right off of what David just said so brilliantly, is to say that you do have a choice about this, and it's good to be aware of it. This is why a program like this is not just for the SEOs and the search geeks out there, but it's really for everyone, because this is the future. This is where the online world is going. And if you need to make a decision about whether you want to be known, my wife is going through this right now. For years, her policy was, I don't want to be known on the internet. I don't want to be connected. I don't want the search engines to know who I am. And she, worked hard at keeping herself kind of hidden from it. Now, because of business purposes, she's suddenly finding herself having to be known out there and wanting to be known, wanting to be connected with certain things. And she's asking me questions, how can I build that reputation? And the good news is now if you want to do that, just participate. The more connections you create, the more content you create, the more things you are participating in on the web, the more semantic search engines are able to make those connections between you and help people to figure out accurately who you are and what you're about.
Yeah, no, I think those are both great comments, and I'm just going to reiterate my theme, which is that when we look at how this is going to expand, it's going to be as simple as Google's going to turn things on as they get enough confidence in the data. So you're going to find more and more spectacular demos that will be even more and more complex, but they'll be very specific. And then you will find more and more, common things coming up to a level where they feel they have enough data, and all of this will broaden over time. I think it's going to be a fascinating thing to monitor and a wonderful journey. So I, for one, am looking forward to it. So thanks, everybody. Thanks for watching. That's it for the Digital Marketing Answers show. Next week, it's going to actually be a Digital Marketing Excellence show. So that'll be myself and Peg Fitzpatrick talking about something that we haven't finished figuring out what it is just yet. But it'll be good, I promise you. So she's on vacation in Florence at the moment. So figuring out business things isn't exactly her top priority just right now. But anyway, thank you, everybody. Have a great day.